Chapter 17. After breakfast was over, Rosie dragged Vaggie into a classroom that looked like it was from the turn of the century. As soon as they arrived, Rosie shoved Vaggie into a desk and walked up to the chalkboard. Vaggie looked around angrily and started having negative flashbacks from the parochial school she attended as a child. Much like Catholic schools her mother told her about, there were rulers for hand-slapping and cuffs that prevented the use of writing with the left hand. Vaggie looked at the desk and stared at the left-hand cuff for a moment before glaring back at Rosie. "Oh, don't worry," Rosie reassured Vaggie. "That won't be required unless you're left-handed." "So, why are we here?" Vaggie asked in annoyance. "Today is the first day of your etiquette lessons," Rosie said cheerfully. "And why do I have to do this again?" Vaggie asked. "Why, so we can make you a proper lady," Rosie replied. Vaggie scoffed and said, "I'm proper enough." Rosie chuckled to herself and said, "I beg to differ." "How so?" "What makes me so fucking improper?" "Swearing for one." "Yeah, so?" "Vaggie, proper ladies do not swear." Vaggie smirked and retorted, "I read somewhere that swearing indicates a high level of intelligence." "Does sleeping with another man when you're engaged indicate intelligence?" Rosie asked in a mockingly sweet voice. Vaggie scowled in response and said, "We were not having sex." "Whatever you were doing, you need to learn some manners," Rosie said. "Alastor told me that you grew up as a whore in the slums of El Salvador." "I had to provide food for my mother and siblings, you bitch," Vaggie yelled standing up at her seat. "You also had such a horrible temper that you hurt people and found your way to hell," Rosie said shaking her head judgmentally. "You're here, too," Vaggie spat back. No changing the subject, dearie." "What makes me so much worse than you?" "For one thing, I didn't show my flower to multitudes of unsavory men." "You sure about that? You seemed experienced when you went after Angel, you bitch." "Oh, he led me through it," Rosie said calmly. "Sure," Vaggie said sarcastically. "You're a bigger whore than I am." "Nah-ah-ah," Alastor's annoying voice rang from the door. "Vaggie, dear, no disrespecting your teacher." "What are you doing here?" Vaggie asked. "I thought you were taking care of Angel." "Only if you don't sass or talk back to Rosie," Alastor chided. Vaggie rolled her eyes in annoyance, so Alastor's staff glowed a threatening shade of red. Vaggie gulped fearfully as she realized how serious he was. "All right," Vaggie conceded. "I'll listen." "Good girl," Alastor said happily calming down. "Now, if you ladies will excuse me, I have some work to do while the familiars are healing some of Angel's broken bones." Alastor disappeared before Vaggie could ask what he meant. A demon's injuries healed faster than human injuries, but a broken arm still wasn't something that could be healed in a day without help if the demon in question was as badly injured as Angel was. Sadly, before Vaggie could think anymore, Rosie started talking again. "Now then, let's work on balance and posture," Rosie said. Vaggie simply groaned in anticipation. Rosie set a notebook on Vaggie's head and said, "Now, balance this book on your head." Vaggie sat up straight while keeping the book balanced on her head. "Good," Rosie said. "Now, shoulders back, feet flat on the floor, and chin up." Vaggie reluctantly did what Rosie asked, scowling at her condescending tone the whole time. "Smiles go for miles, my dear," Rosie said shaking her head at Vaggie's frown. "Aren't you sexist?" Vaggie muttered under her breath. "Manners, Vaggie," Rosie rebuked. Rosie took the book from Vaggie's head and put the notebook on the desk before handing her a pen. Vaggie glanced down at the notebook and pen and asked, "And what do you expect me to do with this?" "Take notes, dear," Rosie replied ignoring Vaggie's rude tone. "Of what?" Vaggie asked. "Of my lecture, young lady," Rosie replied patiently. "Ugh, fine," Vaggie grumbled. "Today, You will be learning about 4 main topics, Rosie explained as she turned around and wrote on the board to correspond with what she was saying. Ladies' social etiquette, table manners, your place in your marriage, and how to carry yourself when you are with your husband. Wait, Vaggie interrupted. My place? Of course, Rosie said. What is that supposed to mean? As Alastor's wife, you're supposed to be at his side at all times and not one word should be said by you unless you're granted permission. Not the unruly behavior you're used to. What kind of nonsense is that? It is not nonsense at all. Yes, it is, Vaggie snarled angrily. You're saying a woman should be nothing more than glorified arm candy. As far as you're concerned, that is correct, Rosie said with a smug grin. But why? Vaggie asked. Because your husband is a high-ranking demon, Rosie replied. Alastor is not my husband. Not yet, but he will be soon. Vaggie knew she wasn't going to win that argument, so she sat back and said, Fine, but why do I need to learn how to conduct myself in front of my husband? Charlie's the princess of hell and she never asks me to do that. Simple, Rosie hummed. Her parents never taught her how to conduct herself. Vaggie began brimming with rage. Fortunately, that was when Rosie turned around and began her lecture. Now remember, elbows are to be off the table so you can have perfect posture at all times. Rosie began. Vaggie began taking notes which included mostly making mean doodles. Rosie wrote notes on the chalkboard continuously for over 2 hours. After keeping her back turned on Vaggie for a while, Rosie turned around to look at her pupil and thought she saw something in the notebook that shouldn't have been there. Rosie moved forward and snatched up the notebook. On the notebook was a portrait of her, but Vaggie had drawn numerous daggers stabbing Rosie's eyes out and her organs were removed. Rosie glared at Vaggie, who only smirked in response. You didn't hear a word of that, Rosie said in a sickly sweet voice that didn't cover her anger very well. Did you? Not a damn thing, Vaggie said defiantly. Rosie grimaced in disgust and yelled, You naughty little savage. How dare you disrespect me? You will be punished immediately. Vaggie snorted and said, Oh really? And how are you going to punish me? It was then that Alastor opened the door. Oh, Alastor. Rosie squealed while showing Alastor Vaggie's drawing. She spent my whole lecture drawing this obscene portrait of me and didn't listen to a word I said. Vaggie, that was very rude of you, Alastor said, furrowing his brow in disappointment. I had to do something to keep my mind occupied, Vaggie said remorselessly. Valastro shook his head and said, Oh, my darling. Excuse me if her lecture was too boring for me to pay attention, Vaggie retorted. Vaggie, I think Angel should be given some punishment for what you've done to Rosie, Alastor said coldly. What? Vaggie asked fearfully. You can't. You have to keep him in one piece for the auction. Oh, I won't hurt Angel. Not exactly. Alastor said, summoning a tablet with security feed coming from Angel's room. It's about time I introduced you to my healing process. On the screen, Vaggie could see Angel strapped down on that table with medical stabilizers and bandages covering his broken arms and knee. His mouth was open, panting painfully and trying to suppress his moans as Alastor's various familiars flew around him. I bet you're wondering how I plan on healing Angel in about a week considering the extent of his injuries, Alastor said. I mean, demons heal faster than humans, but we still need time. I've found a way to use my magic to accelerate that process according to my will. Why are you telling me this? Vaggie asked suspiciously. Because this process is more painful than the normal healing process, dear, Alastor replied with a smirk. What? Let my familiars demonstrate. Back on the camera feed, the familiars stopped flying around Angel and stood at attention. That was not lost on Angel. Hiya, boys, Angel said with a seductive smirk. We're gonna have some fun today. Aren't we? First, Alastor said. Let's repair the ribs. The familiars took hold of Angel's ribs that were broken, causing Angel to scream out in agony. Then, they forced them together as a red light shimmered around his chest. Angel screamed louder and struggled under the restraints. Vaggie couldn't take it. "Stop it!" Vaggie yelled in a panic. "You're hurting him." "Oh, sweetheart, it's not that bad," Alastor mockingly reassured his betrothed. Vaggie glared at Alastor as Angel screamed louder in pain. "Well, maybe it's a bit painful if you aren't given an anesthetic," Alastor said with a chuckle. Vaggie swallowed her pride and asked, "What do you want me to do?" "Just to behave for Rosie," Alastor replied. "Do that and I'll keep Angel anesthetized and in the room next to yours." Vaggie looked at Angel one more time before pleading, "Okay, I'll behave. Just give Angel the goddamn anesthetic." "I thought so," Alastor said, snapping his fingers, prompting the familiars to stop. The anesthetic was then brought to Angel in a glass mixed with a pink protein shake to give Angel some nutrients. A familiar held up Angel's head while another one held the glass and made him swallow the concoction. As soon as the spider demon swallowed the drink, he fell asleep and the familiars resumed their work. Alastor turned off the tablet's camera feed, put the item in his pocket, turned back to Rosie, and said, "There you go, Rosie. From here on out, you should have few problems." "Thank you, Alastor," Rosie said sweetly. "You're a wonderful friend." Alastor turned back to Vaggie and said, "I'll escort you to the bathroom, Vaggie my dear, so that we all can have a quick break. Rosie, get yourself ready for the lecture. You don't mind the interruption, do you?" "Of course not," Rosie replied. "I'd like the opportunity to powder my nose as well." Unfortunately, Vaggie did have to use the bathroom, so she allowed Alastor to escort her out of the room to the bathroom down the hall. For a minute, Alastor was eerily silent. It was unnerving as Vaggie followed behind him, hearing nothing in that hallway except the sound of their shoes walking on the ground. That silence was daunting, and it was honestly a relief when Alastor spoke again. "I have to warn you, dear," Alastor began. "Angel's recovery will continue to be painful if you don't cooperate with Rosie." "I'll cooperate as long as you aren't hurting Angel," Vaggie replied. "Good," Alastor said, stopping in his tracks and opening the bathroom door for Vaggie to walk in. Alastor then allowed Vaggie to enter the bathroom and take a few minutes to take care of her needs before she emerged and allowed herself to be escorted back to the classroom. Like before, the two were silent until they closed in on their destination. "Oh, yeah. Why do you have a classroom in your house?" Vaggie asked. "No reason," Alastor said. "Other than having a place to teach our future children." "I am not having kids with you," Vaggie said. "I can't believe you agreed to that." "Oh, Vaggie, I didn't want children originally," Alastor explained. "The idea of intercourse is still an idea I'm getting used to. That is not why I agreed to Titok's terms, if that's what you're insinuating. I only agreed to his terms so that I could have his approval to marry you." "How romantic," Vaggie added sarcastically. "I'll take Vaggie from here," Rosie interrupted, taking Vaggie's arm in hers. "Come along, dearie. Chin up, straighten up your spine, tread lightly. Good job. We'll have to have a late lunch if we want to catch up, but we will have so much fun." "Joy," Vaggie muttered sarcastically under her breath. "See you gals later," Alastor said with a wave before he turned away to go back to whatever he was doing.
I'm glad you enjoyed that video/gameplay. Just remember to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment down below. Until next time, goodbye!